Welcome to USMNT Weekly, the only show on this network where we take a weekly look at the USMNT. Today, we're looking into the knock-on effect of Ricardo Pepi's potentially season-ending injury. We're taking a look at some of the breakthrough stars on the periphery of the national team setup, and we're highlighting the MLS teams that national team fans need to pay close attention to this season. My name's Ryan Bailey, a full complement of TSS stars in the house today, including but not limited to Taylor Rockwell. Hello, Taylor.
Hello, Ryan Bailey. I am here physically, mentally, like 50% here. The kids are home once again. We've lost power for chunks of the morning. It's been a day, and it's 10 a.m.
Oh, wow. It sounds very The Revenant, what you're describing, Taylor.
Yeah. I was mauled by a grizzly bear earlier today when I went outside to drink coffee. So, yes, in that way, very similar.
That explains the
whole vibe and look. Yeah.
Did you sleep inside an animal carcass last night?
I just do that generally.
Yeah, thought so. Very good. Yeah. All right. Probably not as much snow where Joe Lowry
You don't get that Lisa mattress? No, it's Lisa mattress with a bear stuffed inside?
I was just about to say, I'm wondering if Taylor sleeping inside of animal carcasses impacts his ad reads at all at any point in time for some sponsors on the show. I'm sure they're lovely and comfortable and made of the finest quality by our lovely friends at various companies.
Yeah. Does the animal carcass combine down into a small box for delivery purposes, though, Taylor?
Well, the amazing thing is when you slice open
Size of
that
a
plastic, right, and it just starts to expand. That stuff's unbelievable. Technology is crazy.
Oh, wow. What a turn we've taken already. Graham Rutland's here. Hello, Graham.
Hello, Ryan Bailey. I sleep on a bed of rocks, which by Scottish standards is luxurious, actually.
Graham's posh.
Are you under a bridge? Do you ask people whether or not they can pass when you...
Are you painting me as some kind of like Stig of the Dump character here?
A troll.
What?
A troll, yeah.
I'd go the other way. I'm just gonna sidestep Stig of the Dump, and I'm gonna say Graham has like the. I feel like he's the one who embraces technology the most of the four of us and is always trying new things. So I'm seeing it more as like he has a bed that is made of stone, but it's like ergonomic stone that's smoothed and designed to fit the
and actually makes you 4 inches taller over the course of a calendar year, that sort of thing.
Yeah, Joe gets it.
I definitely, when moving into this new house and buying a new bed, definitely didn't look at app-controlled sleep pods, which was $4,000. Yeah, when I saw the price, I backed away. But I considered it until I saw that price.
You could not pay me to sleep in one of those. Not because I doubt anything behind it, but just because I don't need the flashing red lights of like, you are not sleeping enough, everything is bad, over and over again. That would not be fun for me.
Graham, I'm kind of worried about you, pal. I'm a little concerned. Just a little, not a lot. Just a little.
I read that Cristiano Ronaldo sleeps in 9 30-minute intervals throughout the nights to mimic the natural rhythms of his body, and so I thought, well, I'd quite fancy a $100 million.
What is the interval between those intervals?
What's that?
What's the break between those intervals? Is it like a little 5-minute get up and stroll around
just
and do
weight
some
training?
Well.
Okay. So that's what I'm doing.
Is that true, Graham?
Tell.
Is that actually true, the 30 minutes thing? Or is that a bit?
Apparently so, yeah. To mimic the natural rhythms of your body, apparently it's more advantageous to sleep in intervals rather than in one 8-hour slot.
Yeah, the natural rhythms of my body is straight on through, not waking up every 30 minutes.
What was the Da Vinci thing? It's like 30 minutes every 4 hours. Whatever Kramer tries in Seinfeld, where it's like you train your body to go into REM sleep immediately. It's apparently not very good for you, but does allow you to sleep a very minimal amount of time.
Amazing. High intensity interval sleep training, like a HIST program he's doing, Ronaldo. Listener, honestly,
you should sell that. You could sell subscriptions to that.
We assume that he spends that waking up period just waking up his children to be like, you should be training right now. If you were like me, you would be training right now. Back to sleep. Like, I'm assuming that's how he spends his time.
Goodness me, listener. If our editing machine wasn't broken, we would have cut all of this out, but you're being treated to it nonetheless. Before we get to our main show, patreon.com/Total Soccer Show, where there's even more of us to enjoy. Bonus episodes, bonus videos, and access to our Discord server. Where all our cool kids and friends are hanging out. Patreon.com/Total Soccer Show. It's going great so far. And also, you can find us on YouTube, where you can see our lovely visages on our YouTube channel. Link in the show notes. Thank you very much. Before we get to our first segment talking about Ricardo Pepi, Joe, did you see this week the under-17 men's team were in action against the under-17 Virgin Islands in World Cup qualification for the under-17 tournament?
Just a narrow victory.
It was. They just about edged it. I don't know if you saw the scoreline, Joe.
I did. It was the actual real version of that fake tweet that was going around about Messi's son scoring like 11 goals for Inter Miami, and then also Diego
was
Luna
fake.
Jr. scoring a goal or whatever it was at the very bottom of that graphic that people believed for some reason. Yeah, what was it, 22-0, the U.S. over the U.S. Virgin Islands? Yeah, that was worth doing. I'm super glad that happened. I think it was worth the trouble and worth the cost, and yeah, definitely something that we should talk about in detail.
There you go. Chase Adams with the 10 goals in that game.
It should have been 12. I mean, he should have done better on a couple of those strikes inside the box.
Disappointing.
Joe, who are we talking about recently who theoretically has U.S. citizenship through the U.S. Virgin Islands?
Brandon Austin, of course.
Yeah. So maybe that was just the statement match of like, see how good we are? We can destroy the national team you could theoretically play for by the other national team you could even more theoretically play for.
Yikes,
There you
man.
go. I'm looking forward to Pablo Mora's deep dive into that US Virgin Islands under-17 team. I don't know about you guys, but that one should be coming down the pipe soon. The most goals ever scored by a US team in World Cup qualifying at any level, according to US Soccer. Congrats for beating the territory of the US Virgin Islands. US under-17s. Great.
So we play England at the next World Cup?
Oh, snap.
You are you expecting like a 22-22 draw in that one and calling it a win? Is that what we're saying?
Now that Southgate's
That's
gone.
the dream.
Floodgates open. Love to see it. Anyway, Taylor, let's talk about Ricardo Pepi, shall we? Likely out for the rest of the season after undergoing meniscus surgery in the US following a knee injury sustained in that Champions League win over Liverpool, where he scored the match winner, of course. We're expecting, Taylor, 1 to 3 months out.
Or 12 years, depending on how hysteric you want to be. Sorry to jump in, Ryan. But yeah, following this one online has been an interesting dive down the rabbit hole of doomsaying and doom scrolling and everyone assuming that the U.S. is cursed.
Well, and just quickly on the timeline, he should be out for at least 3 months, according to Jeff Carlisle. I think 1 month was before they knew kind of how severe it was. That was some of the initial reporting. And Carlisle said it's going to be at least 3 months. It could be closer to 4. I think it was, it could be a couple of extra weeks on top of that.
Yeah.
I do, sorry to jump in, Taylor, and I do want to hear more of your thoughts on this. Whenever I hear out for the season, because that's all the headlines for this, my mind immediately goes to, it's a 9-month injury. Because in my head, I'm always thinking about the beginning of the season. And it's just not to say that this is a convenient timing for the U.S. men's national team. It's not. He's still going to miss a window at least, if not more than that. But it is not as bad as my weird brain initially assumed it was, because I forgot what month we're actually in.
I am a little confused about the injury, which, it impacts him far more than it impacts me. But, I believe I'm correct in saying a meniscus tear, depending on the severity, I know people who played on a meniscus tear 3 weeks later, albeit with a brace. I'm assuming it is more severe than that. But I think the most severe you would have been able to see, when I did mine, it was so bad that it folded over on itself, so I couldn't straighten my leg. That was a pretty obvious sign that something was wrong. I didn't see that level of obviousness from him. So my assumption is that requires surgery. He's out at least a couple months, and then at this point, it's mid-February. He'd be back in, mid-April, and the Eredivisie season ends in May. So maybe there's just a feeling of there's no sense rushing him back. Even if we are in a title race, we want to just kind of be smart with this. So maybe he's back in training by the end of the season. Maybe he's capable of playing. I don't know if he will again this season. It seems unlikely. That then begs the question, how are they going to feel about him potentially playing for the U.S. this summer? And I think that is where a lot of the focus has been. If he is back to fitness by the point of the Gold Cup or by some of the friendlies, is he able to go? Will they let him go? Or is it going to be more so a focus on rehabbing and then preparing for the start of the next season?
Yeah, the timing's not great. Joe mentioned that word timing, and obviously Pepe was having the season of his life in the Netherlands, and it's a shame that PSV played last night against Juventus. Pepe wasn't part of that knockout match. They actually got a decent result. They're still in that tie, so they could feasibly go into the last 16. And Ricardo Pepi, who's scored goals in the Champions League this season, he's got 18 goals in all competitions for PSV this season. Is not going to be a part of that. And then from the US point of view, I think it's an even bigger blow from the timing point of view. I'm not worried about his development long term. He's just signed a new contract as well until 2030, which I think is really good news, because it says that PSV see him in some form, surely, as their long-term number 9. Luke de Jong will at some point be pushed to the side at that club by Peter Bosz. It has to happen at some
2030.
point.
Yeah, 2030.
The year is 2036. Luke de Jong is still hanging around somehow.
And yeah, I wouldn't count it out that Peter Bosz has a love affair with that man. But the timing from the US obviously is going to miss that March window, and that injury comes at a point where, with the 2 goals against Jamaica, it's very clear that Poch has favoured him so far. it just shakes the snow globe again. It just kind of makes everything uncertain. Balogun is still out injured as well. I think he's likely to miss the March window too. I don't think he's going to be back before April with that shoulder injury. He also had surgery. And so you're looking at like second and third choice strikers for one of the few competitive windows for the US before the World Cup. So that's where Patrick Agyemang eyes there from Ryan Bailey is what we call those. It's not ideal.
It's not. I mean, and to run through the list, because we do think Pepi will obviously miss probably the rest of the season, and then maybe he won't be at the Gold Cup. Folarin Balogun expected to return mid-March. As Graham said, he had the shoulder injury in October that he then re-aggravated, so he had to have the surgery. So he's injured. Jordan Pefok injured his hamstring in early February. He's out until at least, I think, mid-March as well. Haji Wright out since November with an ankle ligament injury. He has a targeted return date of next week, but Frank Lampard, the Coventry manager, was stressing that it will be a slow reintegration into the squad. Obviously, they need him and they want him to score goals. So it basically puts that March-friendly timeline into question, because if you don't have Ricardo Pepi, you don't have Balogun, you might not have Wright, you might not have Pefok, who maybe wouldn't be in that conversation anyway. It really does make you wonder who is going to get called in.
Is that Josh Sargent's music?
Come on down, Josh.
It definitely is. Scored a banger this weekend, 4 goals in his last 4 games. 1-0 loss to Preston, I believe, yesterday. Scuppered that run of form a little bit, but he is definitely heating up at the exact right time. Another one worth noting, and then maybe we'll talk about another potential name later on in this episode, Daryl Zike. Remember him? Recovering from an injury of his own. I think it's his second torn Achilles, not the same Achilles. He's torn both of them now, amongst many other injuries. I believe he made his return for the West Brom Academy on Monday. This Monday, he played 32 minutes, a year to the day after he tore his Achilles. So it seems like he is slowly ramping back up to be in consideration, but a year out, has not played consistently in a long time, has had many different injuries. The question is, will he be able to get back to kind of the physical ability that made him such a special player coming out of college and then into the pros. And so maybe he's back in conversation, but I don't think that's happening in the next few weeks or anything like that.
Yeah, and I do want to be clear on all of this. I think we've mentioned the Gold Cup. It seems to me like it would be pretty possible for Pepi to be back by the Gold Cup. Obviously, there's a lot that we don't know. PSV won't have control over Pepi in that window. Like, they'll be able to call up Pepi because it is an official international window. Now, there is more to it when it comes to these sorts of international call-ups behind the scenes. It is a pretty collaborative process, or tends to be, between U.S. Soccer and clubs. So it's not as if like U.S. Soccer are just going to ignore PSV if they say, no, he's going to be at real risk of re-injuring himself and he's not ready. But I think the timeline shapes up pretty favorably for Pepi to be back by those pre-Gold Cup friendlies and those actual Gold Cup games. So I guess I'm looking at this through the lens of the March window in particular, where the U.S. have a semifinal in the CONCACAF Nations League against Panama on March 20th, and then another game 3 days later, whether that's the third place game or the final. We don't know. And I'm also looking at this within the lens of there's only so many more windows until the 2026 World Cup. I believe there are 8 more official FIFA windows, including the Gold Cup, between now and then. It's nothing. It's nothing. We have not yet seen Folarin Balogun play under Pochettino. We won't see that in March either. We have seen some of Pepi, but we won't see that in March. I think that is more so even than the Nations League games themselves, the idea of missing out on opportunities to get reps for this team and for this team to put out their best possible group. That hurts. And it did seem like Pepi had a really, really good case for himself to be that number one guy heading into 26. It's also worth restating, Balogun has not yet played for Pochettino, so yeah, Pepi had the inside track, but kind of by default. And I think this was and has been a great season for Pepi, where he has brought himself to another level and has started to address some of the parts of his game, specifically on the ball and with some of his hold-up play that I think have been lacking in the past. So I do think Pepi might be the best player in this pool right now for that number 9 position. But really, for that March window, we're looking at a guy like Josh Sargent, who's already been mentioned. Brendan Vasquez has gotten minutes for the U.S. under Pochettino so far. Haji Wright was mentioned, Taylor, and I think that's a fair shout. Not impossible we could see him. He's also exclusively played as a winger so far for Pochettino, so I don't even know if he's viewed as a number 9. Then
and
you really do.
Injured.
Yeah, exactly, right. So then you get to someone like Pat Agyemang, who I think is honestly has a real shout here because you're that far down the depth chart. And then you're looking at someone like Jesus Ferreira or, I don't know, a couple other guys in
what about
MLS.
Tim Weah? I mean, not his first position, clearly, but has played a bunch at centre-forward over the course of his career. Has even played a couple of matches there for Juventus this season. So I don't know, it would change the character of that front line, but I envisage something where you have Pulisic, Weah, Hadji if he's available, which of course is a big question mark, and they kind of interchange positions and disrupt the opposition defence. I don't know whether there'd be enough time on the training pitch for that sort of thing, but it could be interesting.
Yeah, I like Weah as a striker and have for a long time. I don't think he's really a great goal-scoring... Well, he's not a great goal-scoring winger, I don't have to say. I don't think. He doesn't score a lot of goals. I think he's been quite good, actually, on the wing for the United States, but I've liked him at striker for quite a long time now. The question is just, if you take him off the wing, who do you play on the wing, right? I like the idea of moving Weah in the middle if you're going to add another high-quality player onto the field. If that gets you Gio Reyna and MMA in midfield, I'm kind of down for that, but you can never count on Gio Reyna being available for anything. So I'm intrigued, Graham. I'm intrigued by that theory.
Eric Winalda says that Eric Winalda could start for the U.S. and score goals, so we could go that route if we needed to. Also, off topic, but I need to note, Joe has once again changed his username to a different Joe. It's Joe Zhao this time, who I'm going to assume Ryan and Graham have zero familiarity with, and most people don't. Why would you?
Well done, Graham. Well done.
I have no
Good
idea
poll.
where he is now.
I don't either,
Las
to be
Vegas
honest.
Lights, 3 appearances
nice.
for the U.S.
Wow,
men's national
okay.
team in 5
USL.
years. Yeah.
Nice.
Wow, Joe. That's a deep cut.
USL
That's a
represent.
deep
I'm also
cut.
wearing a Phoenix Rising shirt, although it's barely visible. But yeah, USL
like it.
represent. That's all I gotta say.
I like it all. Let's get a Phoenix Rising for it in there. Why not? Because I do think that is sort of where we are with that March window, because it's not friendlies. They are like official games, which I forget what the FIFA rules are now on cap tying people, but if there were dual nationals, maybe they're less inclined to play right now if they have other options to consider. I do think it basically sets the stage for somebody like Josh Sargent to go in there and kind of stake his claim. Because again, haven't seen Balogun. We've seen Pepi, but now he's injured. So if Sargent were to go in and score a brace in that first game or score a goal in the final if the U.S. made it there, you then kind of have to lump him into the conversation more than I think we were already. So it does set the stage for somebody to rise up the depth chart even more or cement themselves on that depth chart. But we'll see if that is Josh Sargent or Pat Ajamang. I didn't know that we were now abbreviating. That's how familiar Joe is with him. They've created such a bond.
Yeah, Patrick, Ajaman, either way.
Number 33 himself. Joe, I was going to ask you a question about Josh Sargent, because he's not been called in under Pochettino, right? Is that correct? He's not been in the
I
squads.
do not believe we have seen him yet under Pochettino, no.
And Josh Sargent has kind of been a weird one where everyone seems to like Josh Sargent, but never really propels him into the first choice in their depth chart. How does Sargent coming in to the number 9 spot ahead of Pepi, how does that change like the character of the attack? What's the difference between the two of those in terms of how they play that position?
Yeah, Sargent is going to give you more physical output in that he is a pretty strong body. Also, I'm completely wrong. We saw Josh Sargent in Pochettino's first game against Panama. He did start that match. I'm absolutely full of it. He does bring more physicality to that 9 position. I think he's a bigger threat in the air, despite, to my mind, being a little shorter, actually, than Ricardo Pepi. But he's somebody whose link-up play is better. He is not as dynamic off the ball, right? He doesn't slash in the same way that Ricardo Pepi does. He doesn't have the same sort of quick burst of acceleration, I think, that Ricardo Pepi does. But he does a lot of defensive work. He is an eager presser. We've seen that in a number of positions at club level for Norwich, where he ended up at right back and right wing back for stretches, doing a full Jesse Zardes there. He does add quite a bit off the ball. Not that Pepi doesn't work defensively, but Sargent's output, in my mind, is a little bit higher, and he brings more physicality in possession as well. I think Sargent's a fine player. Like, I don't think if you're the U.S., you go into a game with Josh Sargent as a number 9 panicked at all. And I don't think the U.S. will be panicked regardless with these Nations League games. They want to win them, yes. But really, this, for me, is all about how do you build for 26, and Sargent's probably not going to be that guy at this point. But I still enjoy watching Sargent play, and I think he does bring some real value to this team.
I think there's a good chance it is Sargent, honestly, in 2026. I think because the pool is so wide open at this point, and we haven't seen Balogun in so long, Pepi is very good and has had a good season, but is still the understudy. And even there, I think maybe that matters less because he's getting minutes. He's got somebody ahead of him. We understand the situation there. But I just think it is more open than I am comfortable with. Luckily, I'm not Mauricio Pochettino. But that's where I go back to. I think Sargent could be a guy who has a good performance or a good couple performances and then kind of keeps getting opportunities, keeps getting looks, and does maybe rise to the occasion. There's a lot of maybes and conditionals in there, but he's only 24 years old. Maybe he gets back into the Premier League this season with Norwich. Maybe he gets a move to a Premier League club at the end of this season, or maybe he gets a move elsewhere. I think that would maybe not be the worst thing for him. But I do think he's going to be, to Joe's point, hardworking, putting in a lot of effort. I feel like he's going to be the guy. We see this sometimes when people make their their debuts or their returns to playing where they're maybe trying to do too much, and you see the coach almost being like, slow down, like don't press there, drop back in. And I feel like we're going to get some of those instructions for Josh Sargent, because I think he's going to be eager to perform and impress. But I think there's an opportunity there, just as I think there's an opportunity for any other number 9s who want to start scoring some goals and looking strong up top.
Well, if I'm going to have a positive outlook on this, Taylor, I feel like Germany have been to like a ton of tournaments basically without a number 9. So if they can do it, US.
Yeah, all we need
pretty
is
much
Marco Reus and just a ton of other Mats Hummels and Boateng.
Kai
and
Havertz, he plays for a rubbish team, and
all we need is the rest of Germany's talent. I think the US will be just fine.
All right. On that note, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we're looking at some of the players who could potentially break through into the national setup in 2025. Do join us then. Total Soccer Show, welcome back to USMNT Weekly. All right, Joe Lowry, it is time to spotlight a few players who might make their breakthrough onto the big stage in this year, potentially. Why don't we start in Croatia with Rokas Pukstas, who's a midfielder at Hajduk Split, has represented the US at a number of youth levels. What are we thinking? Little bit more of a spotlight on Mr. Pukstas here?
I'm turning this one over to Graham, because this is a full-on Graham selection on this list. Graham, explain your Rokas Puskás hype. Almost certainly did not nail that. Did my best. We come back stronger. Because to me, it looks like he's not playing as much this year. I haven't seen a ton of his tape recently. I do kind of enjoy his game, but I don't know what the rationale is here from your perspective about why he's a guy to watch in 25.
So the first time I was aware of Pukstas was last year when I wrote about Hajduk Split for the newsletter, and I watched way too much of Hajduk Split. And this was last season, where I think he starts like 25 matches last season. He's a key player in that team, and so that was, even though I'd heard his name before then, that was kind of when he firmly came onto my radar. And he's an interesting player. So to give him his origin story, he was born in Oklahoma. His family is Lithuanian athletes actually, and came through the youth ranks at Sporting KC. Then he is involved in the Barca Residency Academy in Arizona, Thunderbolt City, Casa Grande. He then joined Hajduk at 16 years old, I believe, then makes his league debut a couple years later. And he's been in Croatia ever since, and there's apparently been interest from Arsenal, and Aston Villa and West Ham have been linked. Apparently MLS teams have sent scouts to watch him as well. So he is a player that there is quite a bit of hype around him, which I can understand to a certain degree, but there are big weaknesses in Pukstas' his game. So I couldn't find full matches to watch, so I'm sort of piecing together what I've seen of him and what I've read of him, and certain compilations, which I'm always very wary of compilations, but nonetheless, I apologise for that. But from what I've seen of him, he's a mobile box-to-box midfielder. A bit more emphasis on the attacking side than on the defensive side. I think some of that is down to his physicality. You look at him, he looks like a 20-year-old. You know, he's still got some growing to do to growing into his frame. So maybe as he matures, he'll get a little bit better on the defensive side of the ball. But he's playing for a Gennaro Gattuso team in Croatia, so maybe he'll toughen him up one way or another. But he's got a good short passing game, which is what you would expect of someone who has got links to Barcelona. I know it's the Arizona Academy, but nonetheless the principles will still be there. Bizarrely strong in the air for a player who, as I say, is not physically imposing. I think 3 of his last 4 goals for Hajduk have been headers, which is kind of bizarre. And the big thing that he needs to add to his game, just looking at the game tape, is he needs more goal threat. For someone who is an attack-minded box-to-box midfielder, I think his shooting, whenever you see his shooting, it is often wayward or from like bad positions, so often will get charged down quite easily. And Gattuso's actually spoken about this as well. He seems to be quite high on, even though he's not playing as much this season, seems to be quite high on Pukstas, but he's talked about how he wants him to impose himself on games more frequently, which I take to mean in an attacking sense. So I can see the potential, but I would suggest he's nowhere near ready for an Arsenal or a West Ham or a Premier League club. If we're sort of plotting his career path from this point of view, I would say like the Eredivisie or Belgium as a kind of stepping stone league for him to develop further, because he's still very raw.
I think there's also a pretty established Croatia to Serie A pipeline, and
that's true.
That's where I would guess he ends up sooner rather than later. And I think he's been linked with a few kind of like mid to lower table clubs in Serie A. Fiorentina is on that list. I think there's a couple other ones. And it's worth noting, because I looked it up, he's repped by CAA Stellar, who have a ton of big clients. They represent Eduardo Camavinga, Omar Marmoush, Kobe Mainu, to name just a few, but there are many, many other ones. So he does already kind of have big time agency representation with strong connections around Europe. So I think if he wants to move and if Serie A clubs are interested, I don't think that would be the worst place for him to end up, because I do think the arrival of Gattuso coincides with the kind of reduction in minutes, and I wonder if maybe it's time for him to move elsewhere and challenge himself further.
Hajduk have also got a lot better this season. They've spent quite a lot of money. A couple of the players that they've signed have been in central midfield. They're top of the Croatian league. It looks like they're going to win the title this season. So I think previously there was more of a focus for Hajduk on developing young players, and that focus has shifted a little bit.
Did they have a meltdown last year? Was it them with the Perisic thing where they bring him back to train?
Yes, it was.
And then,
Big split. There's a big split there.
There you go, exactly. So it does feel like things were fractured, things were bad. And as we all know, when the vibe is wrong, you bring in Gattuso to just get everybody on board and sing Kumbaya and make everybody happy.
Yeah. Pukstas's dad, by the way, Mindy Pukstas, was a track and field star at Oklahoma State University. He was an Olympic marathon runner for Lithuania in the 2004 Games. Fun fact for you there. So maybe Pukstas has got an engine on him. That's all I'm saying. His dad is 46 as well, which makes me feel incredibly old.
Well, that fact in itself makes me feel old, because I remember the 2004 Olympics pretty vividly. And now there's someone's son who we're talking about as a potential USMNT.
Wait till you guys find out about Lamine Yamal and how young he is. That's gonna blow your mind.
I mean, Graham, you watched Alfing Haaland play, no?
I did, yeah.
I don't know why you guys are talking like this is a big surprise.
I know, but it's so not to go too deep on this. I remember watching Alfing Haaland as like a kid, whereas the 2004 Olympics feels like in some way I was grown up. Anyway,
I see.
Makes me feel old.
There's this guy Claudio Reyna, and he's got this kid.
I remember watching him as well.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
All right, Joe, how about Damien Downs?
He won't be breaking through, by the way. Sorry.
That depresses
Let's go
me.
to Germany, Joe. Let's talk about Damien Downs, shall we? German ball striker to an American father, playing for FC Cologne. Has played in the US.
Ryan, come on. German pronunciation there. I thought that was your thing.
I was talking about his aftershave brand. It's called FC Cologne.
Sure,
He plays
okay.
for FC
Well,
Cologne
now I'm
before.
scared to say what team Damian Downs plays for, and now I don't know which direction to go anymore. I'm confused. I will. I'll do a bit on Damian Downs. You mentioned a bit of his background there. Some listeners, certainly I would imagine, already know Rukas Pukstas. I would imagine there are several listeners who do know Damian Downs as well, because he has played for the U.S. youth national teams in the past. He's played for the U23s. Did not end up going to the Olympics after all, but was a part of that team a little bit in this last cycle. I don't think he's going to get a March call-up, but it's not impossible given the number of injuries ahead of him on the depth chart. He is the player that was alluded to back in that first segment. He's got 9 goals in 1,200 minutes for Cologne in the second Bundesliga this year. Nailed it. I know. I felt good about it. He also scored against Leverkusen in the Pokal. He has a bit of Bundesliga playing experience as well. Played 200 minutes in the Bundesliga last year for this team before they were relegated. I've lost it, guys. From a scouting report perspective, he is a really interesting profile. He's right-footed, tall, 6'4" is what I find online, and you watch the tape and it absolutely seems believable, even though I'm always skeptical of those things. He's a big dude. He's a tall dude. He is not a like stout individual, right? And I think the lack of real width sort of to his frame does limit some of what he can do with his hold-up play. He can run in behind some. He can win the ball in the air because he does have that height. He's still super raw. I think both with his movement off the ball, I think there's some work to do there. And I think there's still quite a bit of work to do on the ball. But 9 goals for a very, very good team in the second Bundesliga is not nothing in the context of this USMNT player pool. I think he's an intriguing player. I don't think if the full complement of strikers is together for the U.S., he really has a great chance to break in with the U.S. men's national team, if that's the way that we're looking at this in 2025. But could he break into the next level of his career, whether that's via a transfer or via more Bundesliga minutes later on this year at the start of next season? Yeah, absolutely he could. He's a fun player, kind of a late bloomer relative to some other players that have come through and really shined at younger ages for the U.S. men's national team. But he's an interesting profile. I like his game, and I'm excited to watch more of him this year.
Yeah, you can see his physical potential. I think his technical execution is quite messy. So I watched a bit of him this morning, and he scored a goal in the Pokal against Leverkusen. So it was a spike of USMNT related interest after he did that. But even the goal he scores in that match, like his first touch is a little bit messy. It takes him away from goal, and he recovers it, and he wins the ground duel with the Leverkusen player. So good strength in that moment, and then he finishes at the near post. But it's not exactly like a Lamine Yamal sort of execution moment. So I think he's still got a lot of refinement and some tidying up of basically all aspects of his game. But if he can do that, and to your point, Joe, he is a late bloomer. He hasn't got a lot of minutes in the legs, so you would hope that over the next few years he'll improve.
All right. Taylor, any more on Double D, or should we move on?
I just think he's a really interesting guy. Raised in Texas from the age of 1 till the age of 9. Played American football that whole time. Goes back to Germany because American father, German mother. That's the first time he plays soccer / I guess football at that point. And then joins the Cologne Academy when he's 16 years old. Makes his pro debut in 2023. So like 2 worlds lived, and now he's a pro footballer. He's been called up by both national teams recently, youth national teams in the last 12 months. So he was the one I was alluding to earlier with, I'm not sure if like an official competition is going to scare him off a little bit if the U.S. were to call him in. And I think that's a big if. It would then, I think, we're like tie him in a way that he would then have to file the one-time switch. I believe I'm correct in saying. Who knows for sure at this point. But it also might be a step too far, like too early. But I think with the lack of options, he is an intriguing one, given that he's an American forward who's scoring goals. And a thing that I failed to mention in the first segment that I'll bring up now is just that there are options in Major League Soccer, as we outlined. My concern there would be that with the March window, are they at like match fitness and ready to go by then, with MLS like just kicking into gear, or are they still kind of getting out of preseason, starting the season? Are they going to want to then jump ship to go play for the U.S., or are clubs going to want them to do that? So I think there is more of an open door to European goal scorers in this window potentially, and so that's where maybe he could be worth looking at. But who knows if he wants to fully commit himself to the U.S. or fully commit himself to flying over to the United States to play in the Nations League. Who knows?
All right, we shall see. Graham, Caven Sullivan of the Sullivan dynasty, who will be 15 for most of this MLS season. Do we expect a higher workload from him this season?
Well, Joe passed to me earlier, so I'm going to pass to Joe now. He will know the Philadelphia Union sort of midfield depth chart better than I. I've not done my research for next week's preview episodes, but I will. I've set aside the weekend for that, so look forward to those next week. Joe, are we expecting a big season from Caven Sullivan?
Look at us playing 1-2 touch passes, Graham. This
I know,
is great.
we don't even need Ryan at this point.
See, in real life, Graham's too busy doing techers, and I'm too busy trying to actually hit a pass that's had a proper weight off my left foot. So I don't know that we can do this in any other form than the one that we're in right now. Yeah, I think this could be a really fun year for Caven Sullivan. Again, not within the context of call him up to the U.S. men's national team. That's not going to happen, or at least I would be floored if that were to happen. But he's in line, I think, for real minutes this year for Philly. He's playing and starting games in preseason. Again, it's preseason. Taylor and I talked about that yesterday. Truckload of salt on all that stuff. But also, he's playing and starting games and looking really good in preseason against grown men. I think Caven Sullivan is a really, really talented young player. And not just because everybody else says he is. When you watch the tape, you see like this attacking midfield type who still is kind of positionless because he's also still small, because he is a literal child. And that's why we don't need to completely go absolutely bonkers on hyping him up. But he is savvy on the ball, but also off the ball. His understanding of space, he feints to free himself from opposing markers. He creates a few extra inches of space to receive the ball. He sees passing lanes and moves into them to make himself an option off the ball. And he spots those things before the defense does and moves into those kinds of spaces and breaks play open. And we even saw some of this in his actual MLS minutes last year when he makes his debut against the New England Revolution. On the ball, he's got the touch, he's got the passing range, he combines really well. He kind of plays like the youngest in a soccer-crazed family, the youngest of 4 boys, which he is. He's the youngest in the Sullivan family. And he plays like a guy who has played with people 4 years older than him his entire life. And that fearlessness and his willingness to go into duels and to play at the speed of players who are much more mature and much more experienced than he is also helps set him apart. He will literally probably be the youngest player in every game that he's playing in MLS this year. I would not be surprised to see Caven Sullivan play 1,000+ league minutes this year. I don't think it's going to be a regular starter. That would really surprise me. I don't know that would be the best move for him in terms of his development anyway, just from a physiological standpoint. But he's going to play minutes this year, and I think he's going to look really good. That's sort of where I'm at with Caven Sullivan. So again, a 26 World Cup feels not really like an option. I'm not bringing up Caven Sullivan within that context. But as a guy who's worth watching a whole lot more this year, and maybe we'll get on to Philly a bit more later on as well, yeah, he absolutely belongs on this list.
Wonderful stuff. Joe, I'll stay with you to talk about Peyton Miller at the Revs, if you've got a few words to say on him. Peyton Miller, by the way, is a very young American person name. I reckon at my kid's school, 20% of the kids are called Peyton Miller. That's what I'm going to say.
I know, that sounds right. Peyton, Caden, I feel like those are the current names in vogue at the moment among younger men. That feels about right. Peyton Miller, if you don't know the name, listener, you're about to, I guess, both in a literal sense because I'm going to talk about him right now, but also I think he's going to make the Revs a lot of money in the next few transfer windows. 17-year-old left back. I know left back always gets USMNT fans excited.
Correct.
He is athletic and well-rounded. He runs in behind opposing back lines. He really puts good pace and texture on his distribution from that left side. He has good vision on the ball, plays smart progressive passes from deeper areas. I think there are very, very few MLS fullbacks of any age that have his combination of physical tools with the spatial awareness and with the technical ability. He can combine, he stretches, he can hit a ball. He's got some high upside defensively as well. I think that's probably the part of his game that's lagging the most right now, which is not a surprise given how young he is, just 17 as a left back. He's legit. He's fighting with Will Sands, James Sands' brother, by the way, for minutes at left back for the Revs, but he had basically won that starting job last year. I think he's had a bit of a knock in preseason. I'd be real surprised if he wasn't starting week in and week out come April or so, maybe even sooner for New England this year. He is, I think, by far, I'm trying to make sure I'm thinking of everybody, he was by far the best player to come out of that Revs Academy system, really since Bruce Arena came in and the Revs kind of found a bit of new life a few years ago. I'm thinking about Noel Buck, I'm thinking about Esmir Baraktarovic. Peyton Miller is the best of that bunch, and I'm not really sure it's close.
All right. It's Miller time. Or maybe it is. Maybe it isn't. We shall find
Not for
out
him.
this season. Indeed. Graham. Nocky Banks, we've mentioned on this show a couple of weeks back. As far as I'm concerned, still US eligible, still doing good things at Augsburg. What do we think about his prospects going forward?
Yeah, as you say, we've mentioned him a few times recently on the show. That's because he's getting regular minutes for Augsburg in the Bundesliga. He started a couple games now, most recently a 1-1 draw against St. Pauli, James Sands, St. Pauli, of course. That was a couple of weeks ago. And when we picked our way too early 2026 rosters the other week, I put Banks in there because in terms of his profile and his raw qualities, I really like what I see, which is good physicality for someone his age. He's only 18 years old. He's got a big physical frame, but then also his passing range, his passing ability, his versatility in terms of being able to play in an orthodox back four, or he can play in a back three on either side. So I like that part of him as well. I think his concentration. When we previously watched tape, I remember there was a game against Stuttgart where between him and a teammate, the back line gets a little bit fragmented, and I think it's Dennis Undav who sneaks through and scores a goal. So there are still little lapses from him, but as he gets accustomed to first-team Bundesliga football, I'm hopeful that those things will be ironed out. And yeah, I think he's got the tools to have a genuine top-level career, and if I were Poch, even though it's still early in his development, I'd be looking at him for March, just because that centre-back pool is so incredibly weak, and no one player has really made themselves a nailed-on starter at this point.
Yeah, Taylor, I think if I was looking at the players we've discussed so far in this segment, the one I'm probably most bullish about with my limited scope of knowledge would be Banks. Is that fair to say?
I think that's absolutely fair to say. With the minutes he's getting, with the opportunities he has gotten so far, and we assume will continue to get, the question, as always with dual nationals who are playing at a higher level, is what is their level of interest in playing for the United States? Do they want to commit themselves to playing for the U.S. when they have potentially the door open to another national team, especially a national team like Germany? And then even, is it a right now thing? Right now, do they want to leave their club to go try things out with a different national team versus staying with the club and seeing how the rest of the season goes? I think that is maybe where I am with this one. It's worth a call. It's worth sounding him out. It's worth seeing how strong that interest is in going in March. He still feels like one that is going to be harder to get to eventually commit. So I look forward to a week from now when he is fully committed to the U.S.
Very good. I mean, hang on, how old is he? What's our timeline here for commitment, do we think?
He's 18, I think.
He's 18, so could be quite soon. We shall see. We shall see indeed. All right, let's take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk about some MLS teams you should be looking out for this season. Stick with us. Total Soccer Show, welcome back to USMNT Weekly. Hey, Joe. Seems like that MLS is going to kick back into action in a week or two. I'm excited about that. But
Ryan, you know you're doing previews, right? I feel like we need to make that very clear up front.
What do you mean?
Oh no. Oh no.
For MLS?
Yeah. You're not fully ready to go with our MLS previews, Ryan?
Unlike Graham, I've done all my research for the teams I've not been assigned yet, Taylor. Thank you very much.
Oh, you've been assigned, my friend. You've been assigned.
Oh, I've been assigned. Oh,
Yeah.
wow. I'm even further behind then. Very good. Joe! I am excited. I'm looking for March 1st, very much circled on my calendar for the opening game, which I'm going to very
sure.
much go and
To be clear to
attend.
listener, Ryan
show
does know
us
that
the
the season
calendar.
starts before then. That is Charlotte FC's opening home game, I would assume.
That's when.
Anyway.
That's when
Which
we
was
all
when the season
agree.
starts for Ryan Bailey, of course.
Correct. That's when we all agree it starts. Anyway, Joe, which if we can have a USMNT focus on the
Yeah.
league, where you're looking.
Yeah, so I have, as we discussed in a pre-show meeting, I've divided MLS teams that USMNT fans should be watching into 3 separate tiers.
Nerd.
I will
On brand.
not. I'm also open to suggestions for tier names because I just currently have top tier, second tier, and third tier. Not very creative. There's work to do there. But I will.
Nerd.
I will just name my 2 top tier teams, and then I will turn the mic over to the other guys on this panel because I want to hear their thoughts, and then I can clean up again at the end. I think pretty clearly a top tier team this year, and I only have 2 in this top tier, is the Philadelphia Union. And that is mostly because of Kevin Sullivan, so I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time here. Even after trading Jack McGlynn, in terms of starting players, we're still going to see at least a couple of USMNT eligible guys every weekend. Quinn Sullivan and Nathan Harriel are both going to start for this team, it certainly seems to me. And then Kevin Sullivan is in line for real minutes, even at just 15. He is probably the most intriguing prospect in American soccer, and I will be watching. The other top tier team, and I'm guessing this might be someone Graham has on his list, a team Graham has on his list, is Real Salt Lake for Diego Luna, who is in a position that really so few Americans ever have been in Major League Soccer, certainly in the more modern era of MLS, in that he pretty much is poised to be the dominant playmaker for a good MLS team. RSL are going to be one of the better teams in the Western Conference, I think, this year, and Luna is going to have a lot of that playmaking burden on his shoulders. He's improved at a really steady rate since arriving at RSL from El Paso Locomotive in the first place. And if that trend continues after the January camp that we saw, and after how talented we've seen he can be on the field, like he could be in for quite a year and end up making some sort of really large transfer for RSL, whether that's in the summer or in the future. Maybe he sticks around long term. I don't know. But I do know that Luna is pretty much the closest thing to a must-see USMNT eligible player in MLS week in and week out.
Joe, forgive me. I may have been overly focused on making teasing comments as you did your introduction.
No.
Can you explain your criteria for making these 2 teams top tier?
Yeah, top tier teams I think are the teams that that USMNT fans who want to watch MLS should pay the most attention to. Right?
So
I think
those
these
players are closest to
not
BAM,
necessarily,
so
right?
first team
Because
players.
I don't think Quinn Sullivan and Nathan Harriel are. Maybe I misunderstood Graham. I don't think they're guaranteed USMNT players, but I think it's not impossible. And I think Kevin Sullivan is like kind of must watch at this point, and Diego Luna I think is must watch and is close to the national team. So it's not as easy as saying, yep, Luna is going to be in line for March, so they're a top tier team. Although that, I guess, kind of was my reasoning with RSL. I guess it's a bit more nuanced than that, both present and future and other storylines and narratives that I think fit into this.
So you're more focused on I mean, as you mentioned, Philly have a couple of different players. RSL do too with Anelli in there.
Yeah,
but
true.
it
Megan
feels
Elliot's a great shot.
But it feels like you're focused on the potential difference-making players. So maybe like more individuals than it is. Like they have 5 guys who could play for the US.
I think maybe we're reading a little bit too much into Joe's tier system for this. I just did it in
you
ways
came up
that
with it.
I thought made sense. I think the Union are a must-watch team for USMNT fans, and I think RSL are a must-watch team for USMNT fans. I feel like I stated the reasons individually for both of those teams, and it really doesn't go a whole lot deeper than that.
No,
Joe,
I think
can we just dig in another 5
Oh
minutes on the
my
methodology? Just a little bit
No,
more,
Joe.
please.
Here's the reason why I find that really interesting.
Ryan
because
is joking and Taylor is serious.
I'm not. Yeah, because I think when you said I have 2 teams that are like the top tier, if you gave me a guess, I would have gotten it entirely wrong, and that's why
okay.
I found
Interesting.
your criteria so interesting. Because I would have assumed you would have said some combination of the Columbus Crew, because there's Patrick Schulte in there. Then you have DeJuan Jones, you have Max Arfston, who could both play roles for the USMNT under Pochettino. So there is potential for them to break through. There's potential for them to have more involvement and more importance. And then maybe somebody like Seattle would have been on my list because of Jesus Ferreira and Jordan Morris. But I think your list is more exciting, basically. So that's why I was intrigued by it, is because I think a lot of mine were just like, there's guys who played for the U.S., and there are 4 of those guys, so you could watch them. I think your list is more interesting because it's like, here are guys who could be difference makers soon or could be difference makers down the road, but you have the opportunity to watch them try to be that right now.
Yes, I think Joe's list is like potential led. So the players that you mentioned for Seattle, that like Jordan Morris, we know everything there is to know about Jordan Morris at this point in his career. Even Jesus Ferreira, I know he's moving to a new team. There's some interesting stuff there, but at this point in his career, we've seen a bunch of Jesus Ferreira, particularly in the national team. So I kind of went down a similar path to Joe. I think I went even more left field than Joe, quite frankly, with some of my kind of names that I unearthed.
You picked a USL team?
Well, not far off with where I'm going here. So Kobe Henry, who is someone that I remember we spoke about, when he went to... Why did we speak about it? It was nothing to do with Ryan's involvement with Orange County or anything like that. He is on loan from Rem at RSL for this season and has had a call-up to the US national team a couple years ago. Had, obviously, RSL are kind of plunder USL Championship, but Henry's had a different sort of route where he's gone to Europe. It's not really worked from there. He's ended up in the B team. Now he's in MLS. I think he's still like 20 or 21 years old, so still young and hasn't had a lot of first team senior football in his legs. So I'm interested to see how he does in the RSL team this season.
Yeah, that's a good shout, Graham. I think Henry is in line for some minutes this year. I don't think he's going to be a starting player for them right off the bat. I also, I'm not even really sure if we've seen enough of Kobe Henry to know if he's good or not. But his pathway is super interesting, and RSL are a team that does a good job of giving minutes to and developing young players if they think they're ready. Yeah, the Kobe Henry element, and I completely spaced on Anelli as well, who you'd mentioned, Taylor, and I think has a pretty bright future and maybe could sometime move his way into that national team picture in a more real way outside of January camp. So yeah, RSL I think are totally a top-tier team here.
Nice. A couple more for me. I would say Austin, specifically for Brandon Vasquez, given the number 9 issues we talked about earlier in the episode. I would say Charlotte, for similar reasons, plus Tim Ream. And then lastly, Joe, where are you on Colorado, who have, I think, a lot of kind of similar players to what we were talking about with maybe Seattle? Like, you've got Zach Steffen in there. I know you're a huge fan of his, and you want only the best for him. But also Sam Vines, Reggie Cannon, Georgi Mihailovic, and Teddy KDP now there as well. So are Colorado on your list for USMNTers?
They are in the 3rd tier, and they make it there based off of volume alone, and there's a lot of volume in the 3rd tier. Also, Austin ended up in the 3rd tier because I do think it's worth watching Vasquez, but Owen Wolf's on that team too. There's not a whole lot of players that I think are really going to be difference makers now or in the future for the U.S., but they are in that 3rd tier. Yeah, Rapids, with all the players that you mentioned, I think do fit in this category. Seattle's already been mentioned. They're in my 3rd tier on volume alone. It is very 2019 Gold Cup of them with the roster that they've assembled. And then CF Montreal are the other team, and they're probably the most fun team that I have in that bottom tier. They're probably going to be starting 4 USMNT-eligible players under the age of 24 this season. Caden Clark, Bryce Duke, Cole Campbell, and Jaden Neal. I am far more interested in the center backs there than I am in the attackers. They've also got Brandon Craig and Dante Seeley, who are U.S. Youth National Team legends, who are there to revitalize their career. And I'm not ready to give up on either one of those guys either. So Montreal, I think, are an interesting one. And then that kind of leaves me with my 2nd tier of teams. And folks in the comments or on social media or in the Discord can get angry and re-tier all these teams for me. In the 2nd tier, I do have Charlotte for Patrick Agyemang because I think he's a really, really interesting player. I'm not as excited about him as I am Diego Luna, but I am going to be watching him a lot, and I think I'm not going to be alone in that fact among USMNT interested parties. The Crew are in this. I think Max Arfson is by far their most intriguing player. I'm not watching the Crew for Patrick Schulte, unfortunately. Sorry, Patrick Schulte. But Max Arfson does kind of get me out of bed here a little bit. Houston Dynamo with Jack McGlynn, I think, is a really, really interesting one to watch. They also play great ball. So just from an aesthetic standpoint, watching the Dynamo's fun. The Revs are on this list because of Peyton Miller. They would have been a top-tier team if Peyton Miller was not a left back, but sorry, that's a defense tax for you. They also have Noel Buck back, and he's probably going to play real minutes for this team this year. I would imagine he gets 1,500 minutes or more across all comps this year. And then the last team that I have on this list, and maybe my favorite pick of all of them, is the Chicago Fire. Partially for Brian Gutierrez, but mostly for Greg Berhalter. I think it's going to be fascinating to see how Greg Berhalter does back in MLS. I know this completely is outside of all of my other reasoning for these tiers, but I'm interested. I think USMNT fans are interested. It's going to be a hot topic this year. If the Fire are struggling, and they're probably going to struggle a little bit. They've had a lot of changes this offseason, and they were horrible last year. So there's a basement to claw their way out of. But if that happens, there's going to be a lot of Berhalter discourse online, and I think they're going to be pretty decent this year. And I think they're building towards being even better than that. So I'm interested in the project as a whole and Greg Berhalter's role in that project. And I think he's going to do a really good job in a lot of ways. They're also starting to really move players from the academy into the first team again in like a real way. They signed a youngster named Robert Turdine to the second largest homegrown deal in MLS history earlier this offseason, only behind Kevin Sullivan. They are making real moves again in the youth space. That's more for the future than it is for now. But yeah, between Berhalter and Gutierrez, who's in line to be a starter for them, and some of the other young players that they're beginning to move through, yeah, the Fire are a second-tier team for me in my completely, well, not completely, but a lot arbitrary rankings.
I noticed you didn't mention Chris Brady there, Joe, because presumably he's ours and he's going to play for Scotland.
Graham, I'm going to say this once: I would never condemn Chris Brady to sleeping on a bed of rocks. stick with the U.S.
Toughen him up. That's what Pushkas needs in Croatia.
I'm pretty sure. I don't know if Chris Brady. I think Chris Brady might have built his own house in Chicago. I don't know. He's like the most mature. I don't know if he built it or if he moved into it, did all the reno work himself. He is like the most mature young player, one of them that I've ever been around. I just think his ceiling's probably not USMNT player, unfortunately. So that's why I didn't mention him. But he doesn't need toughening up, Graham. Get your mitts off Chris Brady.
Wow. I hope someone. I'm putting a call out to the Discord for someone to do a graphic of Joe's tears. Maybe it could be like a wedding cake, and like see if Montreal's doing a lot of work at the bottom on the tier. We'll
do anything else with your time but that, listener. I'm begging you.
Solid advice. All right. Any more on this segment, Graham? Any more names? Have you exhausted the list?
No, Gutierrez was on my list. Chicago Fire were by extension on my list. I think my whistle was wetted by watching him at Camp Cupcake, where you can quite clearly see the potential, but maybe just a little bit early in his development. So I'm hoping this year is the year where he kind of puts everything together and he really starts to like impose himself on games and you have like significant goal threat and stuff like that in the final third. So looking forward to that.
Delighted to hear that your whistle has been whetted, Graham. Wonderful stuff. Let's wrap up USMNT Weekly. Taylor Rockwell, pleasure as always to have you, my good man. Thank you very much for your contribs.
The pleasure is mine, and I look forward to Brady playing for Scotland in the 2030 World Cup, and I look forward to Greg Berhalter coaching Scotland at the 2030 World Cup. It's going to be great.
Oh, wow. Graham Ruthven, thank you very much. How does that vision lay with you?
Loves it.
I think I'll take it. If it means Steve Clark's no longer a manager. Thanks, Taylor. We'll take him.
A manager, period? He's gone? He's been booted out? He's done?
Yeah.
All right.
Let's make the change.
Wow. We are taking some swings on this here episode. Joe Lowry, a pleasure as always, my good man. I hope you and your tears are
Steve Clark's going to coach the Dallas Mavericks. That's what's going to happen.
Oh, he's so dour. Joe Lowry, thank you very much.
Thank you, Ryan.
And listen, thank you very much for joining us on this one. We'll be back on the feed very shortly, but for now, bye!